start the Cam Studio going. So now we'll get into the nitty-gritty. Everything is led up to talking about, of course, the GIS web mapping. Now we'll talk about a particular API for building your own web maps. That would be the ESRI ArcGIS JavaScript API. As I mentioned early on, there are multiple ESRI APIs. Okay, fine. Well, I'll just talk about them. The main APIs are Silverlight, Microsoft Silverlight, Adobe Flex, and JavaScript HTML. And we chose that for the reasons I discussed early in the course. Silverlight and Flash are both starting to fade into the background with HTML5 coming to the forefront. JavaScript API is the most flexible of the APIs, and also is usable on mobile devices. I just noted, I'm not going to go back and look, that when you publish an application, there was always an option to make a JavaScript Silverlight or Flash version. I don't remember seeing that when we were playing with that earlier. I'll have to look again sometime, but we might have gotten even closer to phasing out the other APIs. They're certainly well in use. I mean, we have plenty of Silverlight API maps, but JavaScript API is the way to go. The JavaScript API is a lightweight API. We talked about light, thin versus thick clients early in the semester. It allows us to create ArcGIS server maps. That is, as I was just mentioning, the key is cross-browser compatible, and I didn't mention this, but cross-device compatible. And a lot of the content that you'll see here, as well as a lot of the content I borrowed from for the course, is at this website. This is a very useful website for you to use. It's pictured here, and I will attempt to click on it. So the ArcGIS API for JavaScript is where we get all the latest information about this API. Right from tutorials. What's in here closely models, what we'll do in the next couple weeks. Core concepts. Is a support for popular browsers. Other additional concepts. An API reference. We talked about object-oriented programming and how there's objects with properties and requests. These are the objects in the ESRI API. Notice if you've taken ArcObjects, there's a lot less, thankfully. But just as one example, under the ESRI, or most or all, under the ESRI library, there is, for example, a library called Geometry, which has these specific objects in it, such as polygon. So this is the properties and methods for a polygon in the JavaScript API. And the polygon has properties like spatial reference and methods, get centroid, get map extent, and so on. If you've done other programming, if you've done ArcObjects, this will be familiar. We'll talk a lot about using these pages, although if you've done ArcObjects, actually this is a lot easier. A lot less objects to remember. We don't have to, for those that do know ArcObjects, we don't have to worry about interfaces at all, which could be kind of confusing. Much simpler. Maybe other issues that didn't come into play there, but overall it's simpler. So this is the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. The current version, and I mention this because they update it pretty regularly. We're at version 3.9. It wouldn't surprise me if next month in San Diego in July the 4.0 was rolled out. They like to roll out new things at that conference. The good news is it's usually backwards compatible. I've seen a couple instances where it's not. So if you've designed a whole website and 4.0 comes out, well, first of all, as you'll see, you'll still be referencing 3.9 because you specifically reference a specific version. But you can usually update to the newest version without too much headache. The new versions tend to introduce new things rather than change how old things happen. Not always. We will also get familiar with another thing. It's kind of called Dojo. Dojo is an open source toolkit that works with JavaScript. And some web developers said they had heard of it. I've never seen Dojo implemented outside Esri myself, but I don't do a lot of that type of programming. Dojo is similar to jQuery in concept. I mean, it's very different. It's completely different from jQuery, but like jQuery, it's a toolkit that's used to make JavaScript programming more efficient. And that should say the JavaScript API. We also have this website, which will probably be useful for you, not as much, the dojotoolkit.org website. And they're up to 1.10 on that. The 3.9 API uses 1.9.1. So that's another thing you have to keep an eye on upgrades. Although, for one of our projects, I have a slide on this in a couple minutes. You can use Dojo for a lot more than the base requirements for making a map. There's a lot of charting and graphic capabilities in Dojo which are cool that you could build that has nothing to do with Esri. One of our developers, Amanda, actually used Dojo 1.10 for some of that other capability, even though it's not used as much in GIS yet. So some of the major elements of Dojo here, we will work with. We don't get into all of Dojo. We get into enough of it to make the JavaScript API work. Like I said, there's a whole lot out there. The base and core Dojo objects we'll work with. We'll work with Digit, D-I-J-I-T, which contains HTML design widgets and CSS, or style sheet themes, to go along with them. We'll do that especially near the end of the course, which isn't that far from now, in 1 month. Dojo X are additional things that produce graphics, libraries, charts, and grids. You won't use that as much. You still don't have to use Dojo X. You could. Amanda did for a special project. Here's some screenshots. You can create really cool graphs and designs. Again, that's starting to go beyond using Dojo for Dojo, not Dojo for ESRI technology. And as I said, the Dojo website also contains downloads, features, and so on. And they have their own API documentation. I didn't know that apparently there's a DOH, D-O-H, like that. So here's all the things that you can do with Digit. Most of these we won't, and to be honest, most of them I've never seen. So we tend to use Dojo for the foundations that are required for ArcMap. So the JavaScript API is a set of JavaScript programs that are external. You don't need to, thank heavens, or it wouldn't make any sense. You don't need to reproduce ESRI's JavaScript code, but we need to reference it so that we don't need to write all the code. And we reference that in HTML using the link and script source option. Remember, this is similar for those that have done desktop programming. It's similar to the using statement or an import statement. An import statement in VB or a using statement in C#. So there's two ways, we'll talk about this a little bit, two main ways to reference this, the JavaScript code, through what we call a CDN. CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. A content delivery network is a set of online servers that are optimized to deliver references to you very quickly. And two of the largest APIs or CDNs would be Google Codeplex, and ESRI has CDNs. So below, this makes it very easy to upgrade when new versions often come out. So here's the code. First, the ArcGIS JavaScript API 3.9 has its own style sheet. So here's an online reference. When we did style sheets earlier, we just said, map.css and it's on our hard drive. This style sheet is actually linked to a web location. So this is a location where ESRI has the style sheet that corresponds to the JavaScript API. And it's available if both HTTP or HTTPS if you have a secure site. If the rest of your site is secure, you'll want to reference the HTTPS here. Otherwise, you might get an error. You might have seen websites that say there's mixed content, and it pops up a lot of warnings for the user. What mixed content means is there's some elements on the page that are HTTP and some that are HTTPS. You want to avoid that. So I've referenced the JavaScript API style sheet right from ESRI's website. And I have to say, their servers are so good. They have load balancing. It's one of those deals where they probably have 1,000 servers. When your request comes in, there's a load balancer that directs your request to the server that's the least busy. This is faster than your own machine in most cases, which is mind-boggling to me, but it's the case. It can actually pull this content from the internet sometimes faster than your own server. So this is a preferred method. I had to turn around to the opposite way. As I said, I was preparing a laptop with a JavaScript site on it without internet access. So I had to go through and download all these files, which wasn't fun. We also need to download the JavaScript that builds the JavaScript API, and here's the source here. So it's at ESRI's Content Delivery Network, js.arcgis.com/3.9. So when 4.0 comes out, I would encourage you to read the documentation, of course, but once you're comfortable that it's compatible, you can simply change the location in those two lines. And now suddenly you're using the 4.0 JavaScript API. So that's another advantage of using the online CDN, or Content Delivery Network. Another option, this is often used for mobile devices. There's another version of the JavaScript API that's compact. That means that they've cut out a lot of additional features and made it even more lightweight. Though it's meant for mobile devices. Mobile devices can't, with 4G, LTE, they're getting faster, but they don't stream content as fast as the internet on a desktop. So this is meant for that platform. But often what we'll do, even if the core objects that are required are in this, we'll use it anyway, even for a desktop site, because it'll make it that much faster. It includes less modules. You would need to reference them manually if needed. So an example, and we'll talk about the require statement a lot, but this screenshot shows kind of like a using statement in C#, using the GEO processor task, which you can do with ArcGIS JavaScript. The ESRI JavaScript API, and you'll see me abbreviate this, and you'll see that abbreviation a lot. JSAPI stands for JavaScript API. You may even see me then say AGS for ArcGIS Server. So AGS JS API is ArcGIS Server JavaScript API. In case I didn't mention, Application Programming Interface API. It does support localization of language content based on a browser's language setting. And this is important for developing international sites. So pages that are localization enabled will display content in the browser's language of choice. So one thing that did do this was Facebook. If you go into settings in Chrome, advanced settings, one of the settings is language, and I can promote French to the top. So now when I do that, I may have showed some of this already, and hit refresh, is strange. There it goes. So in Chrome, I went to content, shows French as my preferred language, and watch what happened. The title bars and so on. The login button becomes Connexion. And I can do this for a number of languages. Let's change to Chinese as the default language. And websites with an international focus will do this. Facebook. But I noticed before CNN doesn't. It's also, and this is a bigger challenge that you have to account for that's not easy, is a left to right language. But Facebook has accounted for that. I made it Arabic, and look, so there's code behind Facebook's page that's shifted the whole layout of the Facebook login screen to the opposite direction because Arabic reads from right to left. And Google, I think, would do the same thing. The hardest this ever was for us is when we did a website in Australia. It's easy when it's a whole other language. We had to find all the, because what you do, so your code would, and we're not going to go, I just wanted to make you aware that JavaScript will support this. Your code reads the locale, and this is the property, and Dojo has a property called locale. It's a 2-character string. FR means that in this case where you can do this Dojo code overrides the browser and would set the display to French irregardless of what the user has chosen. It would always be French with this code, even if the browser set to Chinese or English or so on. So what the code does is, and this is what makes it kind of a pain, anytime where there's text, instead of putting that text, you put a pointer to a database, and it reads from a particular table depending on which language is set in the browser. And here's another example of adding a particular piece of text there. But what we did on a particular project, so in your code, this is code for a project in Morocco. They primarily wanted French. So here, instead of, this is ASP, we'll get into that, instead of just giving the text to learn more, it retrieves a database value, txt learn more, from a localization database. And notice it's a database here with the value, and then the value in English, learn more, if en-us is chosen by the browser, but if fr.fr is chosen, text learn more instead of saying learn more, it would say en savoir plus. Here's the French version of that. So it's a little bit off topic, but I want to at least touch upon it, especially if you want to make a website with international focus. Here's how you would do that behind the scenes. I think it's in the I provided 2 slides that show in XML format rather than in Visual Studio, example of XML showing the key values in English and then the same values in French in this particular case. And also showing where, instead of just saying export parcels, the code grabbed that particular item from the database in ASPX. We had earlier discussed using the CDN to reference. You could also download, I don't really have a slide to show that, but what you would do is go to that website. Oops. What I'm trying to say, not well, is that you could go to this website, grab the code, download it, and reference it locally. It's going to be harder to update, it might be slower, but where you would definitely have to do that is where you have a remote system that doesn't have internet access. Then you would have to download all the files locally. So this is the JavaScript API CSS file. Notice it's not the easiest to read. They make it transfers faster over the internet without all the spaces. So at this point, it doesn't matter if it's easy for you to read. The computer is reading it, not you. So they remove all the spaces to make it faster. Same with they have a couple spaces there. So this is the JavaScript behind the 3.9 JavaScript API. So if you go on to the JavaScript website, click Get the API, it shows you what I've shown you, where you can reference them online. Now this is for the JavaScript API. You'll see momentarily how jQuery and other things that we might use would be referenced from Google. Maybe we don't get into it that much. And here's HTTPS versions if you have a secure site. If you want to download them, there's an ArcGIS for JavaScript API download page, and it goes, oops, it's got Flex, JavaScript. The versions all go way back. So I could click on this. Oh, now it thinks it's French. That's interesting. ESRI is localized. Entrez votre nom. Well, the license agreement is not French. So you can see here, I don't need to open them. Oh, I can't open them. There's a million subfolders. But these are all the sub JavaScript files that are at ESRI site. Like for example, the JavaScript that defines geometry and so on. So you could download those locally, reference them in a local path if you need to. I notice that when you do that, you also get all the documentation and the compact version. So again, if possible, the preference is to use the online content if you can. It's a lot easier to update and it's faster. As I mentioned, JavaScript API heavily relies on Dojo. The Dojo library is referenced within the JavaScript API, so we don't have to add a reference to Dojo. It's already taken care of by ESRI. But there often are resources within Dojo that we do need to include, and that's often done. You'll see this statement a lot, dojo.require. That's a lowercase d on Dojo. Dojo.require is also akin to using a using statement in C#, import statement in Visual Basic. And since it's JavaScript, Dova is JavaScript, that's found within the script tag. So here's two ways in which we require an object, and as we go on in the course, you'll need more requirements. The one that you'll almost always want to require is this Esri.map class. That's the class that enables you to create a map. And legacy way to do that, the traditional way to do that is dojo.require and then in quotes esri.map. The asynchronous macro method, AMD, you'll see, I mostly use examples of legacy. We'll do some AMD examples near the end. It's just another way to do the same thing. So below, we're requiring esri.map in the same way using AMD style code of JavaScript. But then with AMD, we'll talk about this right near the end, we also attach an anonymous function. And so that function runs before the map can be used. So it's a way to ensure that any preconditions are met before the map is initialized. I'm going to stop the